The sun burned without mercy. It hung high in the sky like a watchful eye, pouring heat over the endless stretch of dry earth. The land was silent, too silent, except for the occasional whisper of wind dragging dust across the ground. No birds sang. No water flowed. It was the kind of place where even hope seemed to wither. And yet she kept walking. Barefoot and trembling, the young woman stumbled forward, each step slower than the last. Her dress, once pale and soft, was now torn and stained with dirt and dried blood. Scratches marked her arms, her face, her legs, evidence of a desperate escape through thorns, rocks, and darkness. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, as if her body had forgotten how to keep going but hadn't yet learned how to stop. She didn't know where she was, she didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing: she couldn't go back. A sudden gust of wind pushed against her, nearly knocking her off balance. She caught herself on weak knees, her hands sinking into the hot dirt. For a moment she stayed there, frozen, her fingers trembling as they pressed into the ground. The earth felt real, solid, safe, at least compared to what she had left behind. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, barely louder than the wind, she whispered, "They hurt me." The words were fragile, almost lost in the emptiness around her, but they carried the weight of everything she couldn't fully say. The fear, the pain, the nights she wished she hadn't survived. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall. Even her body seemed too exhausted to cry. She forced herself to stand again, one step, then another. Each movement felt heavier, as though invisible chains still clung to her ankles, pulling her back toward the nightmare she had escaped. Her mind flickered with memories, shadows of faces, harsh voices, hands that grabbed too tightly. She shook her head, trying to push them away, but they lingered like echoes in her skull. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself. Though her voice cracked, the ground sloped slightly downward ahead, leading toward a stretch of scattered rocks and dry brush. It wasn't much, but it was something different from the endless emptiness behind her. Maybe there would be shade. Maybe there would be water. Maybe. Hope was a dangerous thing, but she held on to it anyway. Her steps quickened just slightly, fueled by that fragile thread of possibility. But her body was reaching its limit. Her vision blurred at the edges, the world tilting in slow, dizzy waves. The sun seemed closer now, heavier, pressing down on her shoulders. She didn't notice the moment her foot caught on a loose stone. She fell hard. The impact knocked the air from her lungs, and for a second everything went black. Pain shot through her side, sharp and immediate. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out beneath her. The strength she had been clinging to was gone. This time she didn't get up. She lay there in the dust, her cheek pressed against the burning ground. The heat should have hurt, but she barely felt it anymore. Her body was numb, her thoughts drifting like smoke. "I tried," she murmured faintly. The wind shifted again, softer now, almost gentle, as if the land itself had taken a breath. Her eyes fluttered open just enough to see the horizon stretching endlessly before her. No buildings, no roads, no sign of the men who had chased her. For the first time since she ran, there was silence, not the heavy, suffocating silence of fear, but something quieter. Something still. Her lips moved one last time. "They hurt me." And then her body gave in. The world faded. She collapsed fully into the dust, motionless beneath the burning sky, alone, broken, and unaware that she had crossed into a land where everything was about to change. The land was never truly empty. Even in its quietest moments, it watched. From the higher ridge beyond the scattered rocks, a figure stood motionless, blending so completely into the landscape that he might have been mistaken for part of it. His dark eyes scanned the desert below with patient precision, trained by years of survival in a place where hesitation could mean death. He had seen her long before she ever reached the rocks. At first, she had been nothing more than a distant shape, unsteady, slow, out of rhythm with the land. Not an animal, not one of his people, something else, something wrong. He had followed her path with his gaze, noting the way she staggered, the way she paused too often, the way she kept looking behind her even when nothing was there. Fear moved differently than hunger or thirst. It left its own kind of trail, and then she fell. He did not move immediately. The Apache warrior remained where he was, crouched low against the ridge, watching. The desert had taught him caution. Strangers did not simply appear here, not without reason. A lone traveler could be bait, a trap, a sign of something worse lurking just out of sight. His eyes shifted across the horizon, searching. No dust clouds from horses, no glint of weapons, no movement except the restless wind. Still, he waited. Time passed, minutes, maybe more. The sun crept slightly across the sky, casting longer shadows over the fallen girl below. She did not move. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Slowly, he rose to his full height. His steps were quiet as he descended the ridge, each movement deliberate, controlled. The ground did not betray him. It never did. He moved like the wind, present but unseen. As he drew closer, the details became clear. She was young, younger than he had expected. Her clothing was torn, hanging loosely from her thin frame. Dirt and dried blood marked her skin, telling a story he did not yet fully understand, but one he had seen before in different forms. Her feet were bare, blistered and cut. Her hands were clenched weakly into the dust, as though she had been holding on to something that was no longer there. He stopped a few steps away. For a moment, he simply looked at her, outsider. That fact alone should have been enough. His people had learned long ago that outsiders brought trouble. Sometimes they brought sickness. Sometimes they brought violence. Often, they brought both. He should leave her. That was the safest choice. The wise choice. But wisdom did not quiet the instinct that stirred in him now. Carefully, he crouched beside her, his gaze never leaving her face. Her breathing was shallow, barely there, but it was enough. She was alive. He reached out, then paused. Even this small act carried risk. If she woke suddenly, she might panic. She might scream. She might draw attention from whoever or whatever had driven her into this place. Still, leaving her here would mean death. Not quick. Not kind. The sun would take her first. Then the cold when night came. And if neither claimed her, the land's other predators would. His jaw tightened slightly. Without hesitation now, he moved. His hand hovered near her shoulder before finally making contact, gentle, steady. Not the touch of someone who meant harm, but not soft either. A grounding presence, no reaction. She did not wake. He studied her for another moment, then shifted his attention to the ground around her. Tracks. There were signs. Faint, but there. Not hers alone. Others had followed. His expression hardened. So that was it. She was not just lost, she was running. The wind would erase the trail soon, but not before a skilled tracker could read it. And if he could see it, others could too. Time was no longer something he had. He looked back at her, at the fragile rise and fall of her chest, at the quiet desperation written across her face, even in unconsciousness. This was no longer a question of whether he should act. It was a question of how quickly. With practiced ease, he slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, lifting her from the ground. She was lighter than he expected, too light. Her head tilted slightly against his arm, her hair falling across her face like a curtain. She did not wake. Without another glance at the open desert, he turned and began moving toward the ridge once more. But this time, he was not just a watcher. Now he was part of her story, and whatever had been chasing her would soon find that she was no longer alone. Darkness faded slowly. At first, it was only a blur of shifting shadows and faint warmth against her skin. Then came the distant sound of something crackling, soft, steady, unfamiliar. The girl stirred, her brow tightening as awareness crept back into her body like an unwelcome guest. Pain followed. A sharp ache spread through her limbs, pulling a quiet gasp from her lips. Her fingers twitched against something rough beneath her, woven, not dirt. That alone was enough to spark panic. Her eyes snapped open. For a moment, everything was too bright, too close. Shapes moved in fragments, light, shadow, flickering orange. Her breathing quickened as she pushed herself upright too fast, the world spinning violently around her. No, no, she choked. Her voice hoarse and fragile, she scrambled backward, her hands searching for something, anything to defend herself. But there was nothing, only a blanket beneath her and the hard ground below it. Then she saw him. He stood just a few steps away, still as stone, watching her, the Apache warrior. Her breath caught sharply in her throat. Fear struck first, pure and immediate. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She flinched, pressing herself further back, her shoulders hitting the side of a low rock behind her. There was nowhere else to go. Don't, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, don't come closer. He didn't move. That was the first thing she noticed. He didn't step forward. Didn't reach for her. Didn't speak. He simply stood there, his expression calm, unreadable, his hands relaxed at his sides. There was no weapon drawn, no sudden motion, only stillness. It confused her. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she watched him, waiting for something, anything, to confirm the danger her mind was screaming about. But nothing came. The fire between them crackled softly, its glow casting flickers of light across his face. She could see him more clearly now. The sharp lines of his features, the steady focus in his eyes. There was strength there, undeniable, but there was no cruelty. Not like them. Her breathing slowed just slightly. Where am I? She asked, her voice barely more than a breath. For a moment he didn't answer. Then quietly he spoke a few words in a language she didn't understand. Low, steady, almost rhythmic. His voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't threatening, it was calm. She blinked, confusion replacing some of her fear. I don't understand. He seemed to realize that. A brief pause. Then he shook his head slightly and stepped back instead of forward, increasing the distance between them. The gesture was small, but it spoke louder than words. I won't hurt you. She stared at him uncertain. Her body still trembled, but something had shifted. The panic wasn't gone, but it wasn't overwhelming her anymore either. Her eyes flickered around the space. They were in a sheltered area, partially hidden by rock and brush. The fire was controlled, contained. Nearby, she noticed a small container of water and what looked like wrapped food. He had brought her here, helped her. Why? Her gaze returned to him, searching his face as if it might hold the answer. You found me? He gave a slight nod, that was all, no pride. No explanation. Just a simple acknowledgement. Her throat tightened. Memories tried to surface again, hands grabbing, voices shouting, the feeling of being trapped, but she forced them back down. Not now. She couldn't survive that again, not here. Instead, she focused on what was in front of her. You didn't. She hesitated, her voice breaking. You didn't hurt me. It wasn't really a question. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. His silence felt like confirmation. Carefully he moved, slow enough for her to follow every motion. He crouched near the fire, picking up the container of water. For a split second, she tensed again. But instead of coming closer, he set it down halfway between them and stepped back once. More, always leaving space, always giving her the choice, her. Eyes filled slightly as she stared at the water. She was so thirsty. But fear still held her in place. He noticed without a word. He turned away from her completely and walked a few steps off, his back now facing her. He sat down near the edge of the shelter, his posture relaxed, his attention seemingly elsewhere. Not watching, not forcing, trusting. The silence stretched between them again, but this time it was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was open. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached for the water. Her hand shook as she lifted it, bringing it to her lips. The first sip was small, cautious, then another and another. Relief flooded through her, so strong it almost hurt. She lowered the container, her grip tightening around it as she looked toward him again. He still wasn't watching her. He was giving her time. Her voice came out softer this time. Fragile, but real. Thank you. He didn't turn, but after a moment he gave the smallest nod, and in that quiet space between them, between fear and trust, something began to change. The night deepened slowly over the desert. Outside the shelter of rock and brush, the wind moved in low, restless waves, carrying grains of sand across the ground like whispers that never settled. The fire had softened into glowing embers, its orange light pulsing gently against the darkness. Inside, silence lived between them. The girl sat wrapped in the rough blanket, her knees drawn close to her chest. The water still rested beside her, half-finished. She no longer drank, not because she didn't need it, but because something heavier than thirst had begun to rise inside her. Memory. It did not come all at once. It came in fragments, a sound first, sharp, angry voices cutting through a smaller, safer version of her life. Then hands, rough, unkind hands that did not ask permission. A door slamming, running, falling, being pulled back again. Her breath caught. She pressed her fingers against her temples as if she could hold the memories in place, stop them from spilling forward. But they came anyway, like water breaking through cracked earth. No, she whispered to herself. Across the fire, the Apache warrior remained still. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. But his awareness never left her. He had seen this before, the way trauma returns when the body finally feels safe enough to remember. The girl's shoulders trembled. Her voice cracked as she tried to steady herself. They had me there for days. I don't know how long. It all feels mixed up. Her eyes stayed down, fixed on the ground as if looking at him directly would make the memories worse. They said I didn't belong anywhere else, she continued, her words coming unevenly now, that no one would come, that no one would even look. Her hands tightened around the edge of the blanket. I tried to fight. I really did. But there were too many of them. A pause. The fire popped softly, breaking the tension for a brief moment. She swallowed hard. And then I ran, she whispered. When I finally got a chance, I just ran. Her voice broke on the last word. Silence returned, not empty silence, but heavy, meaningful silence. The Apache warrior finally shifted slightly, not toward her but just enough to show he was listening. His presence remained steady, grounded like the land itself. She hesitated, then finally lifted her gaze toward him. For a moment, she expected judgment. Fear had taught her to expect it from everyone, but there was none. Only attention. Quiet, unwavering attention. That confused her more than anything. You don't even know me, she said softly, almost accusing herself more than him. Why did you help me? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm, measured, short, but not cold. He spoke in words she still did not fully understand, but his tone carried meaning even without translation. Not all things require knowing a person first. Her brows knit slightly. I still don't understand your language. He nodded once, acknowledging that gap. Then he looked toward the fire, as if choosing his words carefully in silence before speaking again. He placed a hand lightly against his chest, then gestured outward, toward her. A simple motion. You were suffering. I saw it. Her throat tightened, that was all. No explanation about who she was. No demand for repayment. No curiosity that felt invasive, just recognition. Her eyes lowered again, but this time not from fear. Something else pressed behind her gaze, something fragile and unfamiliar. I don't even know your name, she whispered. He watched her for a moment, then spoke a single word, soft, grounded, certain. She repeated it slowly in her mind, afraid she might forget it. Afraid it might be the only solid thing in a world that had become unstable. The wind outside shifted again, brushing through the rocks like distant breath. She pulled the blanket closer. The last time I trusted anyone, she said quietly, almost to herself. It didn't end well. The Apache warrior didn't react with surprise, or pity, or anger, only understanding. That more than anything unsettled her defenses. She looked up at him again, studying him more carefully now. The way he sat, the way he didn't invade her space, the way his attention was present but never heavy. It was not the behavior she had learned to fear. It was something else. Something unfamiliar. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I don't even know where I am. He glanced briefly toward the opening of the shelter, where darkness stretched endlessly, beyond then back to her, a quiet certainty in his eyes. You are safe here, for now. She didn't fully believe safety could exist anymore, but for the first time since everything had begun, she wanted to. The fire dimmed slightly, settling deeper into embers, and in the fragile space between past and present, between fear and the faintest possibility of trust, she stayed awake a little longer, just to make sure this moment was real. Morning did not arrive gently. It came slowly, stretching light across the desert like a cautious hand testing something fragile. The sky turned from deep gray to pale gold, and the cold of night began to retreat from the rocks and sand. Inside the shelter, the girl was already awake. She had barely slept. Every time her eyes closed, memories tried to drag her back, hands shouting, running, falling. So she stayed half awake instead, watching the faint glow of early light creep across the ground. The Apache warrior was already moving. Quietly, efficiently, he checked the perimeter of the shelter. His eyes scanned the horizon, reading the land the way others read written words. Every small detail mattered: disturbed sand, broken brush, distant movement. Something had changed. The desert felt unsettled. He paused near the edge of the shelter, crouching to examine faint marks in the dirt. Tracks. Not fresh, but not old enough to ignore more than one set. His jaw tightened slightly, so they were still searching. He rose slowly, turning his gaze toward the distant ridges. Somewhere out there, the men who had chased her were moving through the land, following a trail that would eventually converge here, unless it was broken. His eyes shifted back toward the shelter, toward her. She sat where he had left her, small against the stone, watching him carefully. Even without understanding his language, she could feel the change in him, the shift in attention, the seriousness that had returned. Something was wrong. She stood up slowly, holding the edge of the blanket around her shoulders. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he walked over to the ground near the entrance and knelt, pointing at the faint marks in the dust. Then he traced a direction outward. Her stomach tightened. "They're still out there?" she whispered. He nodded once. That single motion made everything feel smaller. The shelter, the fire, even the fragile sense of safety she had started to build overnight. Fear rose quickly, but this time it did not completely overwhelm her. Something else stood beside it, something new, awareness. She looked toward the horizon. "They're looking for me." He studied her carefully. Yes, but there was more to it now. The Apache warrior rose and walked a few steps away, scanning the land again. His mind worked quickly, weighing paths, distances, risks. He knew this terrain better than any of them. He could move unseen. He could vanish into it, but she could not. Not like this. Not alone. He turned back toward her. For a moment, he simply looked at her as if measuring something, not her worth, but the reality of what keeping her alive would require. This was the moment, the choice that did not come with easy answers. He could leave her. He could return her to the edge of survival and hope the land was kinder than the men hunting her, or he could take responsibility for something that had already become dangerous, something that had already changed the path of his own life. The girl watched him, uncertain, sensing the weight in his silence. "Are you going to leave?" she asked suddenly, her voice thin. The question hung in the air. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, but not too close. Enough that she could see him clearly, but not enough to overwhelm her. He pointed again, toward the horizon where the tracks lay. Then he placed a hand over his chest, then toward her, a decision forming. "Without words, I stay." Her breath caught slightly. You're staying?" she repeated, almost disbelieving. He gave a single, steady nod. Something in her chest tightened. Not fear this time, but something more complicated. Relief mixed with disbelief. Hope tangled with caution. "You don't even know me," she said softly. He looked at her for a long moment. Then his answer came in action rather than speech. He turned slightly, scanning the land again, then began gathering what little they had: water, supplies, tools. Not hurried, not panicked, focused, prepared, not just to survive, to protect. She watched him carefully, her voice quieter now. "This could put you in danger." He paused for a brief second, then continued, as if the answer to that had already been accepted. She sat back down slowly, overwhelmed by the reality of it. Someone was choosing to stay, not because of obligation, not because of reward, but because she had been seen. Outside, the wind moved across the desert again, carrying distant dust and unseen movement. The Apache warrior finished preparing and returned to the edge of the shelter, standing between her and the open land beyond. Not as a prisoner, not as a stranger, but as a barrier. A decision made without hesitation. And for the first time since her world broke apart, she realized something she had almost forgotten existed. Someone had chosen to stand between her and what was coming. The desert never stayed still for long. Even when it looked empty, it was not. Heat shifted across the ground. Wind rewrote the surface of sand. And somewhere far beyond sight, movement continued, slow, patient, and determined. They were coming. The Apache warrior knew it before he saw them. It was in the way the birds had gone silent, in the way distant dust hung too long on the horizon, in the subtle pressure of the land itself as if it had begun to hold its breath. He stood at the edge of the shelter, unmoving, reading what others would never notice. Behind him, the girl sat quietly, watching his back. She had learned not to speak too much, not to move too suddenly. Fear still lived inside her, but now it shared space with something else. Awareness that she was not alone. Still, the silence felt heavier today. "What is it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on the distance. Then he lifted a hand slightly, pointing toward the far ridge. She followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing. Then, movement, tiny at first, almost indistinct, shapes blending with dust and light. But as she focused, her stomach tightened. "Riders far off but real, they found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Apache warrior shifted his stance slightly, scanning the terrain on both sides. Not just one direction, not just one threat. Multiple paths converging. This was not a random search anymore, this was a hunt. He turned back toward her, his expression calm but sharpened with urgency. He spoke a few short words in his language, then gestured firmly toward the shelter's rear exit. "Move." She stood quickly, her hands trembling. "What do I do?" He didn't hesitate. He walked to a small patch of ground near the fire's remains and erased it with his foot, removing signs, flattening tracks. Then he grabbed their supplies, bundling them quickly. Every motion was efficient, practiced. He had done this before. That thought made her uneasy, but she pushed it away. "This way," he said in broken but understandable words, pointing toward a narrow passage between rocks. She nodded quickly and followed. The world outside felt different now, heavier. The wind no longer felt free. It felt like something watching, something waiting. As they moved through the rocky passage, the Apache warrior stopped occasionally, pressing his hand to the ground or touching stone surfaces, reading the land, listening to it in a way she could not understand. Behind them, faint sounds echoed through the distance. Voices, calls. The search was spreading. "They're close," she whispered. He gave a short nod without looking. Back. That calmness unsettled her more than panic would have. He wasn't afraid. He was focused. They reached a narrow ridge where the land dropped sharply on one side. Below, the terrain opened into a wide, uneven basin, perfect for movement, perfect for hiding, perfect for ambush. He stopped and crouched, studying it. Then he turned to her. His gaze was steady. "This is where choices matter." She swallowed hard. "What are we going to do?" He pointed down toward the basin, then to himself, then to her, a simple plan forming in silence. She frowned slightly. "You want to go down there?" He nodded. Her fear spiked. "And if they see us?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a small stone and tossed it into the basin. It disappeared into distance, no echo, no response. Hidden ground. He looked at her again. "Trust me." She hesitated. Everything in her mind screamed that following someone into unknown terrain while being hunted was dangerous. That trusting anyone again was dangerous. But then she looked back toward the distant riders. They were still coming. And staying still meant being caught. She took a shaky breath. "Okay." One word, but it changed everything. He didn't waste time. They descended quickly but carefully, moving into the basin where shadows stretched longer and visibility narrowed. The world above them shrank into a strip of sky. The Apache warrior moved like he belonged there. Silent, certain, every step calculated, The girl struggled to keep up, but she followed. Behind them, the sound of movement grew louder, closer. The hunt was no longer distant. It was here. The Apache warrior stopped near a cluster of rocks and signaled her to stay low. He crouched beside her, scanning every direction at once. His hand rested briefly near a stone. Steady, grounded, not fear, preparation. Above them, faint silhouettes appeared at the ridge. The searchers. The girl's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment everything could collapse, but the Apache warrior didn't move away. He stayed between her and them. And in that tightening space of danger and silence, the hunt officially began. The basin felt like another world. Above it, the desert stretched wide and open, but down here everything was broken into shadows and stone. Light entered in thin streams, cutting across dust-filled air and disappearing just as quickly. It was quieter here, but not safe. Not yet. The girl crouched behind a cluster of rocks, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it would give them away. Every sound above felt amplified. Distant footsteps, shifting gravel, the occasional call carried by wind. The hunt was close. Too close. Beside her, the Apache warrior remained still, not frozen, focused. His eyes moved constantly, tracking angles, distances, movement patterns. He was not reacting to fear. He was reading the land like a map only he could see. She watched him for a moment, trying to understand how he could remain so controlled while everything around them felt like it was collapsing. "How are you not scared?" she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly reached down and touched the ground, then pointed outward, toward the basin's natural curves and shadows. Then he made a small motion with his hand. Open space, hidden space. The land protects those who understand it. She frowned slightly. "I don't understand." He glanced at her then, brief, steady. Then he shifted closer, not invading her space, but positioning himself between her and the open direction above. A silent reminder. You are not alone. A faint sound echoed from above. Both of them went still. Voices. The searchers had reached the ridge. The girl's breathing quickened. Panic threatened to rise again, but something stopped it this time. Not complete calm, but something new forming inside her. She looked at the Apache warrior again. He was already moving. Slowly, he adjusted their position, guiding her deeper into a narrow pocket between stones, a natural concealment. He placed her behind him without force, shielding her with his body angle rather than touch. "Stay low," he said quietly in broken words. She nodded quickly. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay still. Above them, silhouettes appeared along the ridgeline, faint figures scanning the basin below. The searchers were close enough now that dust could betray them, sound could betray them, even fear could betray them. One wrong movement and it would be over. The Apache warrior did not look up at them directly. Instead, he observed their patterns, their spacing, their hesitation, their overconfidence. They were not trained trackers like him. That mattered. A lot. One of the riders moved slightly forward along the ridge, leaning down to inspect something in the distance. The girl instinctively shifted but stopped herself. The Apache warrior's hand moved subtly in front of her. Not a warning. A grounding presence. Stay. She froze completely. Her body screamed to run, but she obeyed him instead. Something inside her was changing. Not suddenly. Not magically, but slowly, like something rebuilding itself after breaking. Minutes passed like hours. Above, the searchers began to split. Some moved left along the ridge. Others stayed center. Their formation loosened. They were uncertain. That uncertainty was an opening. The Apache warrior noticed it instantly. He shifted slightly, pulling a small object from his pouch, something simple, natural from the land. He held it for a moment, watching the timing above. The girl whispered again, barely audible, "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at her. For a brief moment, something passed in his expression, not fear, not doubt, but instruction. Then he pointed to himself, then upward, then made a small motion, distraction. Her eyes widened slightly. "You're going up there?" He nodded once, firm, certain. Her stomach tightened. "That's insane." There are too many of them. He didn't argue, he didn't explain. He simply adjusted his position, preparing to move. And then, unexpectedly, he looked at her longer this time, not as someone he was protecting, but as someone who was beginning to survive. He reached down and placed a small stone in her hand. It was simple, ordinary, but it grounded her. Instantly, then he tapped it once. Stay. She swallowed hard. What if you don't come back? That question lingered in the air longer than the silence that followed. For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. He did not give comfort in words. Instead, he gave something stronger. He placed 2 fingers briefly over his chest, then pointed toward her. I chose this. And then he was gone. He moved upward through the rocks with impossible silence, blending into shadows, becoming part of the terrain itself. The girl was left behind. For the first time since everything began, she was alone again. But this time she did not collapse into fear. She stayed low. She held the stone tightly, and she listened. Above her, the hunt shifted. Something was about to change, and inside her something else had already begun to wake. The desert had gone strangely quiet, not peaceful, never peaceful, but tense like the moment before a storm breaks. Even the wind seemed to hesitate between breaths, brushing lightly across the rocks without commitment. The girl stayed hidden in the narrow pocket of stone, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the small stone he had given her. It was simple, almost meaningless to anyone else, but to her it was proof that he had been there, that she hadn't imagined everything. Above her, faint echoes drifted through the basin. Voices, movement, a sudden shift in direction. Something was happening. Her heart pounded harder with every passing second. She wanted to move, to run, to do something, but she forced herself to stay still, just as he had told her. That decision, small but conscious, felt like the first real act of control she had taken since her escape. Then came the sound, a sharp call from the ridge, followed by confusion, then shouting. Her breath caught. Something was wrong for them. Above, the searchers began to scatter. Their formation broke completely. Dust rose as horses shifted direction abruptly. Commands were shouted, but they were disorganized now, uncertain, panicked. The hunt was no longer in their control. She didn't understand what had happened, but she felt it clearly. The balance had changed. A distant echo of movement drew her attention to the left ridge. A figure appeared, briefly between the rocks. The Apache warrior. He was no longer hidden, but he was not running. He stood in open view for just a moment, calm, centered, unshaken. Then he moved again, fast and precise, drawing the searchers' attention away from the basin. He was pulling them away from her. Her chest tightened. He's distracting them, she whispered. A wave of fear surged through her, not for herself this time, but for him, for what he was risking above. One of the riders broke off and charged toward him. Everything happened quickly after that. Movement, dust, shouts cutting through the air. The Apache warrior retreated into the terrain, not in panic, but in control. Every step was deliberate, guiding the pursuit into narrower paths, away from open ground. He was not escaping, he was leading. The girl pressed a hand over her mouth as her breathing quickened. Don't die, she whispered, barely audible. Please. Her fear shifted again, becoming something sharper, heavier. She could stay hidden, or she could move. But something inside her refused to remain powerless again. Slowly, she loosened her grip on the stone. Her hands were shaking, but not just from fear now, from decision. She looked up toward the ridge. The sound of chaos continued above. Horses, shouting, movement spreading out of control. The searchers were no longer unified. The land they had entered without understanding was turning against them, and he was still up there, alone. Her breath steadied slightly. She remembered how he had stood between her and danger without hesitation, how he had given her space, how he had never forced her, only guided her, how he had chosen her safety over his own. Something inside her hardened, not into fear, but into resolve. No more, she whispered. She pushed herself up. Her legs trembled, weak from exhaustion, but she stood anyway. One hand braced against the rock wall, the other still holding the stone. Then she moved carefully at first, then faster. She climbed out of the hiding space and into the basin's open shadows, keeping low, using every piece of terrain he had shown her to move unseen. Each step felt impossible, but she kept going. Above her, the chaos continued, and then she saw him again, on a ridge edge, partially silhouetted against the sky. The Apache warrior was engaged in motion, not overwhelmed, not defeated, but carefully controlling distance, timing, terrain. Still standing, still fighting without waste. But the searchers were converging again. Too many. Her chest tightened. She reached the base of a rocky slope below him and called out, just once, breaking every rule of silence, "Hey!" His head turned immediately. The moment their eyes met, something shifted, a silent exchange. "Why are you here?" Her answer was not spoken. It was movement. She climbed. He saw it instantly. For a brief second he stopped, not from distraction but recognition. Something had changed in her. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. He adjusted his position instantly, shifting to cover her approach, redirecting attention away from her path. When she reached a lower ledge, she nearly slipped, but he was suddenly there, pulling her up with one firm, steady motion. No words, only action. Together now, the searchers noticed the shift. Shouting intensified, but it was too late. The terrain was no longer theirs. It belonged to those who understood it. He turned to her briefly, breathing steady despite everything unfolding around them. Then he nodded once. Not goodbye. Not command. Acknowledgement. And together, they moved, not as protector and protected anymore, but as two people standing against what tried to break them. Behind them, the desert swallowed the chaos, and ahead of them, freedom finally began to feel real.